Key temperamental differences between the right and the left. Before I talk about the Democratic and the Republican Party platforms and their given political agendas, it's probably important to also talk a little bit first and try to understand why is it that we only have two main political parties in this country. So let's take a quick look at that before we can set out to understand the root of the ideological as well as temperamental differences between these two parties and their voters. The reason we only have two parties in the US, it's really a direct consequence of our first past the post or winner takes all election system. This is really a direct descendant of the British system, which has been passed down to all the countries in the Commonwealth, including USA. In this system of elections, the candidate with the highest vote count wins it all. It forces voters to consolidate their choices in order to avoid spoiler candidates that could not really win, but could, sway the election one way or another. The system invariably leads to a lesser evil electoral system when choices are always broken down to two main candidates. And this was really first described by a French political scientist called Maurice Duverger. He went on to explain how the election system can change party politics and the overall voting landscape. This is almost, based on a game theory point of view, deterministic. The first past the post-election system stands to contrast to some of the other electoral systems that are around the world, such as the proportional representation system, where multiple parties can coexist and even thrive when voters select or rank candidates, and also elected individuals are a representation of actual voter decisions rather than being forced to vote for less desirable candidates. So we unfortunately don't have that system, and we are forced to accept the current two-party system, which is really as a consequence of our electoral system, and that's our modern problem. Okay, so all I have to say is that according to Duverger, our current system's two-party system is really inevitable. It's an inevitable consequence of our election system, whether we want it or not. Okay, so the only way to undo this is to change our election system, which I would like to see, but I'm not holding my breath for that. Okay, so now let's talk about the difference between these parties. Most people really summarize the two parties' philosophical differences in a broad sense, generally saying something like, the Democrats are a party of federalism, big government, and also social programs. So they obviously need higher taxes in order to support the social services that they want. Meanwhile, the Republicans are a party of decentralized government. They want state power and also lower taxes. They tend to advocate for law and order, individual liberty and responsibility, and also free markets. They also tend to emphasize a strong defense and international trade. This is what we've all heard, right? I mean, that's like everywhere in the news. Of course, what I said in the previous video based on Aldridge's work was that the nature of these foundational differences is constantly changing, and the ebbs and flows of politics is constantly on. As a result, it's not surprising to see the modern Republican Party all of a sudden appearing to change towards less internationalism, while the new Democratic Party is now appearing to be more for globalism than its Republican counterpart. Either way, both parties have come a long way and evolved much since Jefferson's strict idea of isolationism versus Hamilton's broad view of internationalism as their main distinction between these two distinct policy ideas in their own time. The parties have come so far that their ideology almost switched completely after the civil rights struggle in the 60s, but that's really a whole different topic for maybe a different video. But to go back to what I was saying, the root of the thinking that focuses on these two-party system is really based on a different vision of the world. And these visions have actually been best described in a book of political philosophy by Thomas Sowell that's titled A Conflict of Visions. Sowell is really a renowned economist and an influential thinker who, although conservative by nature, does really a good job of fair analysis and scholarly work in this book. He explains the ideological struggle between the right and the left, and he explains the source of the conflict that exists between these two disparate visions of human nature. Well, Soul believes that the right has a constrained vision of human nature, whereas the left has an unconstrained vision of human nature. What he really means by this is that the left believes that human nature is infinitely malleable, that we are, as John Locke said in his book, a tabula rasa, or a blank slate, upon which we can write anything that we want after our birth, infinitely capable of changing and evolving, and so we're so malleable that we can, with enough engineering and design, develop into a perfect human through social programming until we can achieve that goal of Thomas More's book, A Utopia. Contrary to the left, the right's view of the human nature and the human condition, if you will, according to Soul, is constrained. And the right generally believes that the human condition has the capability of changing, but only to a limited amount. He described the constrained view as one where human nature is inherently moral, and that individuals have limited information about what they would do and what's the appropriate behavior. This is why human beings require institutions and norms, a political kind of order of some sort, in order to restrain their evil ways. Given that human nature usually prefers something like incentives over mandates, or regulation and checks against power, while promoting gradual to rapid transformation. However, the left usually embraces an unconstrained vision of the human nature. What that means is that they assume that human beings have the capability of far greater benevolence and altruism that they have ever manifested, one in which people can really be improved to or even perfected through political economic engineering. According to Soul, the modern left is increasingly convinced that large institutions and structural change can work cooperatively to create a better world. He also goes on to explain other ideological differences between these two groups in areas like equality and fairness, tradition and change, as well as freedom and constraint. But something that I got out of the experience of reading this book and combining it with my own personal experiences in life was that if liberty and equality are on two ends of a spectrum, this spectrum is probably balanced like a seesaw on a fulcrum. And the right's priority tends to be liberty, as they promote obviously individual rights over group rights, so that each individual can really define his or her own good life as they see it fit. In contrast, the more collective mode of thinking that is exhibited by the left requires a focus on equality and fairness, which prioritizes and also promotes social justice and empathy for groups rather than individual welfare. Unfortunately, any increase in the liberty will inevitably come at the cost of creating inequality, and any increase in equality will also come because it has to be by force. Therefore, it comes at limiting liberty. And the reason for this little seesaw effect is, what I hate to break it to you, is the fact that by nature, and me, being someone who has a background in science and biological sciences, we are, by the virtue of evolutionary biology and programming, are unequal due to the fact that our DNA is programmed differently in order to enhance our variation, in order to be able to have some survival. But this inequality creates a little bit of a problem. That means that we are inherently going to be unequal, and the only way we can gain in that equality is by impinging on liberty. And that is that problem that we're going to have to deal with in order to find that proper equilibrium. The individual variations dictate this inequality, and we're just going to have to deal with it. Of course, is also why finding that optimal state of equilibrium between these two forces of equality and liberty should be the goal of all of the independent centrists, such as myself, that promote moderation. So that really is the goal. Okay, so if you disagree with anything that I said in this video or have any constructive criticism or feedback, please write that in the comments below. I will try to read them and see if I can get back to you. This is another complicated topic, but Soul's book, A Conflict of Visions, is certainly a great read and worth exploring and investigating. I hope that it captured the essence of this argument while once again adding my own 2 cents and my own experiences to it. Now, that we know also what the basic framework of ideological differences between the right and the left tends to be, what we're going to do in the next couple of videos is to talk about each party's platform at the present time and get into a little bit of detail with that. So see you in the next video, and until then, let's work together to save this country.